Hello, everyone. My name is Antoni Piza, and I'm speaking here from my office in New York. And today, my guest is Michelangelo Roig-Francoli, eminent professor at Cincinnati Conservatory, writer, scholar, pedagogue, but especially also composer. Miguel Angel and I share many things. Among other things, we come from the Balearic Isles. He's from Ibiza, I'm from Mallorca, and we both came to the United States a few decades ago, and we both have developed most of our careers here. And by the way, today is October the 2nd, 2025. I'm in New York, and as I said, Miguel Angel is in Cincinnati. Good morning, Miguel Angel. How are you?
Good morning, Tony. I'm very well, and it's great to be here with you.
Yes. As I told you earlier when preparing a little bit this conversation, I'm very curious about your upbringing. Probably not that different, your musical upbringing. Probably not that different from my own. So, how did you become interested in music and that sort of things?
It was probably different because in Mallorca at the time there were many more musical opportunities than in Ibiza. Mallorca had the conservatory and had an orchestra, and so Ibiza had basically nothing. There was at the time. Now things have changed a lot. But at the time there was no conservatory. There was a municipal school of music that basically was for a small municipal band, and I had nothing to do with that. So basically, no, there was nothing. What there was an amateur type of group, which in Spain we call rondalla, which is an orchestra of guitars, bandurrias, which is something like a mandolin, and lute, not the Renaissance lute, but it's a folk lute that we very common in the Mediterranean countries. And I was part of the rondalla of a rondalla, and the virtue of a rondalla is that it really develops your ear. You don't really learn music formally. I didn't. I couldn't read music formally, but it develops your ear because most of it is by ear, and it's fairly complicated. And in that circumstance, without basically any possibility of having any kind of formal musical training, I left Ibiza well, first I went to the United States. I came to the United States with senior high school senior level exchange program that was
Oh,
called, probably still is called, American Field Service, an absolutely fabulous program. And they placed me in Nashua, New Hampshire, for 1 year with a family that had 4 kids, and they were all in music. So that was a very, very musical atmosphere where they put me just because they saw the affinity with my playing guitar and lute and so. And that really surrounded me with the whole ambience of music in different styles. One of them was a jazz player, the other one was a rock player, and so on. So I went back to Spain very much with music in my skin and in my heart, but not knowing what to do. So then I went to Madrid to the School of Architecture. I started in architecture in Madrid. And serendipity had it that my physics teacher in architecture was a composer. Actually, someone that you may have heard of because later on he became well known as a major TV presenter in Spain for anything having to do with opera. He was pretty much the TV presenter for the Teatro Real. His name is José Luis Tellez.
oh yes, of course, of course.
Yes, José Luis Tellez, a very well known
Yes, I know
character.
him. I know him. He's a great writer, and
Yeah.
he's kind of a Renaissance man.
He is really, yeah, a great scholar, great writer, great thinker. Well, he was my physics teacher in architecture, believe it or not. And he was a composer at the time, that was his background, an avant-garde composer. So we hit it off and we became friends. And at one point he said, listen, if you really want to do this, if you really want to get into music, I can open doors for you in Madrid, in the world of composition. get you some good teachers, and get you moving. And I said, absolutely. And as they say, the rest is history. Just at that point, I dropped out of architecture and I started very intense because I was already 19 by then. That's a very late start. I started very intense studies in music, and after a while, what I did was, and that's also a story that for some other time, but it's quite a serendipity story also, with a major composer in Madrid, whose name was, he already passed away years ago, Miguel Angel Coria. And Miguel Angel Coria was, he was an incredible craftsman. His music was the best crafted music probably in Spain at the time, and he was known for being a very exquisite orchestrator and very much into craft. And I worked for him privately at his home on a weekly basis for 4 years. And those 4 years with Miguel Angel Coria were really kind of an old-fashioned type of learning composition and learning the craft, one-on-one with a master.
Yeah,
Um,
like Boulanger, all
yeah,
the
that
American
type of
going.
thing. Yes, yes. And so it was absolutely fabulous. And I learned craft deeply. I mean, I learned the craft of anything, harmony, counterpoint, orchestration, and so. And at the end of my 4 years with him, I wrote. It was kind of a graduating piece with him, 5 pieces for orchestra. Now, those 5 pieces for orchestra were really beginning of my. Well, I had by then I had already premiered quite a few pieces in Madrid and so, and all over Spain. But the 5 pieces for orchestra, which were commissioned from the Spanish National Radio, Radio Nacional de España, and they were premiered by the orchestra of the National Radio, the Orquesta de Radio y Televisión, at the Teatro Real in Madrid, and that piece won a first prize with Spanish Jeunesse Musical, the Juventudes Musicales national competition, and then the National Radio took it to the UNESCO Rostrum of Composers in Paris, and there it won second prize. And those two prizes, all of a sudden, not only kind of started my career in Spain in a big way because there were many reviews and things, but actually put money in my pocket to live for a whole year. So all of a sudden, I lived for a whole year as a graduate student, let's say,
Right,
as a
right.
pool graduate, nothing extravagant, but sure, for me it was a lot of money at the time. Well, I had some friends in Indiana, at Indiana University in Bloomington, where of course there's one of the best schools of music in the world, and they said, Miguel, you've got to see what this is. You've got to see the level of a great world-class American School of Music. Come over for a year, and then you go back, and it doesn't matter where you spend your money. Come here. You'll learn a lot. You'll enjoy it. So yes, I came here. I came to Indiana for 1 year, and that was 1982. And we're talking now 43 years later, and I'm still here. So the 1 year became a whole life.
I
Basically,
would
the next.
like to take a little pause here in this Lebensraum, this kind of,
Mhm,
that living space that you're talking about in your career, because I'm a little bit younger than you. And I remember when you were in Madrid and you premiered in 1982, I think,
mhm,
the Cinco Piezas para Orquesta.
mhm,
And that was extremely well received.
mhm,
The way I remember this, well, first of all, I saw your name and I thought, oh, this is a very interesting composer. And right now, this composer is receiving a lot of attention. And then I believe I read a review by Enrique Franco
mhm,
of the premiere, and he used for the first time in Spanish music criticism, he used the word postmodernism
mhm,
or something like that.
mhm,
Uh, that word has never been used, and I believe that he used that word. And he said, these composers, you, number one, but there were other people, you
mhm,
probably
mhm,
remember their name. These composers are taking a second look at the second Viennese school, at the Schoenberg tradition, which was kind of predominant in concert music in Spain.
Hmm.
And they are considering again the possibilities of melody, harmony, rhythm, tonality, functional harmony, and things like that. And so, one what I would say is that one of your claim to fame maybe is that you were one of the introducers in the Iberian Peninsula of a musical language which was very unusual in 1982, that of postmodernism, namely music a little bit more accepting of the tonal system.
Hmm.
And also, you came to the United States, in which they were a little bit ahead in the sense that that had already happened here. Of course, we have Elliot Carter and Milton Babbitt, but we also have the reaction to that. So in Europe, that reaction was a little bit later, and in my view, you were one of the pioneers of that new tendency. Am I correct in this little
I
digression?
think you're totally correct. I would even go as far as saying that, to my knowledge, the five pieces for orchestra, which were, by the way, you're right, an openly, totally postmodern piece, despite the fact that we didn't know the term at the time, we didn't use it, we didn't know it, neither did we understand the concept. All of that has been defined a little bit later, looking back at that, what was happening then and still now. Basically, postmodernism, which was a movement that really started more in architecture than in music, but it really then it went everywhere. Postmodernism is a style that breaks the boundaries between modernism and the past. Modernism wants to break with the past, and then you have conservative or I don't know, more neoclassical styles that don't want to leave the past. Well, postmodernism breaks those boundaries completely. So a postmodern composer is going to use in a very eclectic way both elements from the past and elements from modernity and from modern languages, putting them together indistinctively and without any problem with it, actually. So yes, you can have a movement that has a melody that's accompanied, and it's not really necessarily, of course, openly tonal. I haven't written any functional tonal music really that it could be called such in my music, but yes, tonally centered somehow, some kind of tonal centricity. And yet, I mean, there is a movement in the five pieces for orchestra that is based on a 12 tone series, a 12 tone row that is presented in the bass. So the bass has a 12 tone row. And on top of it, I built dissonant triadic harmonies. So triadic harmonies with, or tertian harmonies, triadic harmonies, but with added notes. So it's a combination of, and those chords have nothing to do with the row. So here you're putting together a harmony that's more in traditional with a 12 tone row that's holding the whole harmony. That would be a very clear postmodern attitude, so to speak. So yes, you're right.
Okay.
I would go as far as saying that, as far as I know, the five pieces for orchestra were the first piece in Spain that was, at least, piece that was well known and well received and with reviews and so, that was clearly postmodern. I'm not aware. Composers at the time were not doing that in Spain at all. I mean, you have to think that. The composers that were famous and well known at the time and being performed were Luis de Pablo, Cristobal Hafter, Tomás Marco, and all of those composers were openly very modernist composers. They were very much of the Darmstadt school and the Darmstadt
Yes.
circle. Yes, so.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the way you describe it is fantastic, and yes. So, I imagine the audience. You were in the audience probably when
Mhm.
they heard that those sound. They found it very, very refreshing, and I know that the reviews, and of course, reviews is just one point of view, but the reviews were very optimistic and very look. some people, the way I remember it, some people, namely you and other composers, are opening paths towards other
Right.
soundscapes.
Yeah, and I can tell you one thing. Tomás Marco, after, no, not Tomás Marco, Enrique Franco, that you mentioned, the critic of the major newspaper in Madrid at the time, El País, which is still the major newspaper, he told me after the concert, he said, this was incredible, it was a huge success. He says, Miguel, if this had happened in London or Berlin, the whole world will be talking about it. It happened in Madrid, nothing is going to happen. And yeah, it was true. I mean,
I think he was right because people still talk in New York about Einstein on the Beach and the
right,
Metropolitan Museum in the
of course.
1978 or something like that. And well, I wasn't there, but and we have a tendency to mythologize those things. And
Yeah,
of course, 1913 with Stravinsky,
that's
and
right.
also in Vienna, Schoenberg,
Artist.
and
Yes,
anyway, yes, but yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, but there is an interesting aspect. So all of a sudden, you are a successful 1982 Madrid. In Madrid, you are a successful composer. So successful that you even have enough money to take a year off and you come to Indiana. What did you do in Indiana? You studied with Orrego
yeah.
Salas, eminent musicologist and composer. Tell us a little bit about Indiana when you got there.
Yeah, that was a curious and difficult jump. The thing is that I was very tired of Madrid. At the time, we're talking of the post-Franco era still. The ambience, especially in music and in culture, was very closed still. The whole personalities of the Franco era, and which were very politicized, very personalized, were still there and would be there for quite a while. And Madrid was a big, very polluted city. So I got out of Madrid, and in a way, that was not good for my career. Because once you leave the place where you're having being successful, a little bit the place forgets you, and I was aware of that. But it was good for me personally, and I kind of took more the personal path than the career path at the time. I came to Indiana. I came here 1 year as a non-degree student just to spend the money I had and go back and enjoy the ambience at Indiana. The problem is that I loved it. It was absolutely fantastic. It was a world-class school with teachers and students from all over the world and all at a very, very high level. So I said, I'm going to do a master's. So I did a master's in composition with Juan Orrego Salas, a wonderful composer and teacher from Chile at the time. And then after the master's in composition, I didn't know what to do. I didn't really want to go back to Spain, but I didn't see much future either doing continuing in composition because I could see that it was and it still is extremely difficult with a doctorate in composition to really find a path professionally that is going to to allow you uh, to put food on your table, so to speak, to take care of you and yourself and your family. I wasn't a clear path, and at that point, the music theory department um, offered me to support me for to fund a PhD in music theory if I did a PhD in music theory. So I said yes. So then there was a little bit of a switch, still working as a composer, but moving into a PhD in music theory. And so in the end, I graduated with my PhD in 1990, so that was 8 years after I came. I came for 1 year and I was there for 8 years with a master's and a PhD. And then after that, in 1990, with an American PhD in music theory that opened the doors to many, many jobs. There were a lot of work. There was a lot of jobs at the time in music theory, and there are still a lot of jobs, many more than in composition. So just a second, there's some noise outside, and and having met an American violinist with whom I got married, to whom I got married, then at that point I decided to stay in the United States and get a job in music theory, and ever since that was a paradigm switch in my career because once you get
Yes.
job in music theory and you're starting the music theory career path, if you want to survive, you have to focus on music theory. So you have to do research, you have to publish, which of course I loved and I was into it and it wasn't a problem. So that opened my two other career paths or my career trends. So you mentioned composition, which continued, but for quite a while, because I had to focus a lot on my theory production. For quite a while, the composition kind of was a little bit left to the side. And then I started the other two paths, which are the research and scholarly path, which focused mostly on the history of theory, particularly of the Renaissance, and very especially of the Spanish Renaissance, with focusing a lot on a theorist, Tomás Luis de Victoria, and a composer, Antonio de Cabezón. That was my main research at the time. And the third path was pedagogy. That took a little while, but as a result of my teaching and of my not being terribly happy with the sources and the textbooks at the time, I decided it was time to write a new wave textbook, which I did. That was Harmony in Context, and that was published in, I think it was 2000. Finished in 2001 and published in, yeah, around that time, 2001, 2002. And it's really funny because there was very much a lot of need of a new wave of textbooks, and I thought that I could really offer a different perspective that was necessary and that the market really wanted, which was totally true. What happened though is that I wasn't the only one who was noticing that. At the time, I was a faculty member at the Eastman School of Music. And there was one book that had already come out in that direction from an Eastman faculty member that had just retired at the time. That's Robert Golden. But that book had not been terribly successful because it was very clearly anchored on Schenkerian theory, but not only Schenkerian theory, but just Schenkerian graphs, and so that some people kind of were not ready to accept. Curiously enough, while I was writing my textbook, two other young, I mean, my age, middle age faculty members at Eastman were also writing their own books, and that was Elizabeth Betsy Marvin, and Stephen Lates. So three books came out. Mine was the first one. The second one was Lates, and the third one was Betsy Marvin. By that time, I was already at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. I moved here. I came here in 2000 and I stayed here for the rest of my career. So those three books came out pretty much almost at the same time and all opening the same path. Pretty much the direction and the philosophy of those and the pedagogy of those three books were very related and very similar. And that was the new wave. And that new wave pretty much took over at the time. Mm-hmm. And it's still, it hasn't been replaced. Those are still the books that are used most generally and most commonly all over the United States.
Yeah, you published that book. Let's mention that you published that book, Harmony in Context, with McGraw-Hill,
yes,
which is perhaps the largest publisher of textbooks and pedagogical materials in the world, with offices in Hong Kong and Madrid and whatnot. And
25 years later, the book is still with McGraw-Hill, and now it's in the third edition, and it's still going strong. So it's done well. I'm happy about it. Yes.
Congratulations. If I remember correctly, there was a sequel to that book, which was for non-tonal or atonal or post-tonal.
No, absolutely. No, it's not really a sequel. I just happen to have it here. It's called.
Yes, show us, please. Yes.
It's not really a sequel. It's a different book. It's Understanding Post-Tonal Music. It's the book. It's the book that covers the 20th century and now into the 21st century. And that book was also published by McGraw-Hill. And also it's been, I think it was copyrighted 2008 or something. So it's pushing on 20 years of life, and it's going now. After the first edition, McGraw-Hill, that book had a big issue because the book comes with an anthology. And the anthology has all the music that is analyzed in the book. And the big issue is that the anthology is almost 90% music that is not public domain. So the money that the fees for the use, the copyright releases of those of all that music were absolutely astronomical. We're talking of a lot of money, and McGraw-Hill paid for them for the first edition, but then after 10 years, those licenses expire, and you have to pay again. So McGraw-Hill said, it's too much. We cannot do that. So basically, they said we will do a second edition. Rowledge do the second edition will pay for the fees. So Rowledge picked it up, and the version that I'm showing you here is the second edition with Rowledge. And now we're moving to a third edition, and Routledge is again picking up the fees, and we're still paying quite a big amount, lots of money for the release of copyright licenses for all this music from the 20th century that is not public domain.
Mm. But to take up an issue which you already mentioned, uh, that success in the academic world came at a price because you had to temporarily abandon your creative side. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct. I would say I had to abandon the compositional side, not the creative side, because I really think that what I was doing, I mean, writing these books was very creative, and I still find it very
I
creative.
agree.
It's creating a new book on a new pedagogy that kind of breaks ground, and that is very creative. And I find scholarship also research on things that we don't really know about or we don't really understand. And I also find it very rewarding and very creative. So yes, but you're right. I mean, the compositional side was left a little bit to the side until it was 2003, and the factor that brought it to the fore again was the Iraq War, when the United States invaded, that's George W. Bush's government, and invaded Iraq for the second Iraq War, the one that was totally unjustified and based on basically a lie or a false assumption and so on, and resulted in huge a huge amount of civilian deaths in Iraq, and that affected me very much. I had become an American recently at the time, and the country that I had become a part of was doing that to another country really affected me very deeply, and that turned into music. So there were a couple of there was something else going on at the time. There were also that was a terrible time in the beginning of the 2000s. It was also, I mean, in the world, it's a terrible time right now also, 20 years later, but at the time there were several huge genocides. There was one in Darfur that was very, very brutal. And then there was the Kosovo, there was the Balkan Wars, there was the Kosovo genocide. And so all of that affected me a lot too. I'm very sensitive to social world events and social events. And so that made me want and need to go back to music. So that's when I composed Donna A's Requiem in memory of the innocent victims of war and terror. That was one. And the other one was Antiphon and Psalms for the victims of genocide. So those two pieces are both choral orchestral pieces, and they're both based on medieval sacred music. They all have a root in plain chant, and a much more minimalist or simplified musical idiom than the music that I was writing in my first period, the music of the five pieces for orchestra and so. So that opened my return to composition, and it's been, I've been active in composition since. What happened though is quite logical. By that time, and I'm talking in 2003, I was 50. By that time, I had already established a name as a music theorist in the United States. And I had not established a name at all as a composer because that's not what I was doing. My life as a composer, my previous life was mostly centered in Spain. And in Spain, was still known and still remembered me from the time as a composer, especially conductors. So, when you are not known in a field and an artistic field, and you're 50 in the United States, it's basically impossible to really establish a career, a very successful career. So what happened was more than in Spain, they responded very strongly to my going back to composition. So there were a number of conductors, Salvador Brotons,
Yeah.
José Ramón Encinar, and a few others from the period, in some orchestras, particularly the orchestra of the Symphony Orchestra of the Balearic Islands, which is our region of origin,
Yes.
and orchestras in Madrid, and so and Jesus López Cobos, who was the main, who was the well, the major Spanish conductor at the time, and who had been for 15 years and still was in the beginning of the 2000s the music director of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. He was here for 15 years. And then he moved on he left. He was in Europe for quite a while, conducting, and he programmed the five pieces for orchestra. He reprogrammed the five pieces for orchestra with the National Orchestra of Spain, and I think it was in 2002, 2003. I'd have to check, but around there, you know. So anyway, things were happening in Spain, and my music was being programmed, and my music was being performed. So basically, then I found myself with a career that was being picked up a little bit as a composer in Spain, while my career as a textbook author and a scholar in the United States was continuing. So that was kind of two different careers in different areas. And I got quite a lot of performances in the United States of chamber music, definitely, which, through people you know or people who know you. And so, and of course, then there was the wonderful concert when for my 60th birthday that
Carnegie
was
Hall.
organized, and you had a lot to do with that. The Foundation for Iberian Music was one of the organizing entities, along with a few other institutions. My career that we all enjoyed very much. So
Very
yeah,
much.
so that was a little bit also, yes.
Yeah. Uh, uh,
So
let's. You use the word that for one of your big pieces for orchestra, you said, "Well, I use a cantus firmus or maybe a few fragments of plain chant, and then I simplify the structure or the harmonies." You use that word simplification, but um, the music I know by you is not simple because to begin with, it has a certain, I don't know if you agree with that, a certain Mahlerian dimension or Brucknerian, you know. So, yes, you do have piano pieces, and you also wrote for the Foundation for Iberian Music a piece for violin and piano, which is amazingly beautiful. Your wife premiered that piece, etc. So you do have chamber music. But when I think of you, that's interesting. This is just an opinion. I don't think of you as a chamber or piano composer. I think of you as a kind of a composer in the grandiose idiom, Mahler, Bruckner, that kind of thing. So anyway, that's my own appreciation. Do you have anything to say about that, or maybe
Yeah, yes, I have a few things.
contradict me?
No, 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 it's okay. To clarify, you're right about the simplicity or non-simplicity of my music. You're right. I was talking of that period and those pieces. There were like four or five pieces at the time where I adopted, and we're talking of the early 2000s, where I adopted more austere and more economical idiom and musical style, pretty much to allow the message and the text to come through. But that was only a period. That was only a few pieces. You're right. And those, if you listen to Donai's Requiem, which is on YouTube, or to the antiphon and psalms, you will see what I mean. Those pieces are very much in the style that I'm describing. But yes, after a while, little by little, or very clearly, more of the previous style, the style of the five pieces for orchestra, and a big piece also the cantata on Dante's Vita Nuova, that's also from the 1980s, that was written for the National Orchestra and Chorus of Spain. That style, which is not simple at all, is much more complex. That seeped in, and that's pretty much the pieces that you are more familiar with. That would be, and that's the pieces from the 2010s. I mean, the decade of the 2010s, which are three astral poems,
Yes,
Orion, Andromeda, Perseus for orchestra, for instance, that's one of them. And of course, from 2016, the Sinfonia de Profundis, which is a four-movement symphonic symphony that definitely no, it doesn't fall into the category of a simplified idiom. It's quite
no,
complex.
yeah,
Regarding Mahler and Bruckner, I see what you mean, and I see where you're going to. Well, I mean, of course, with all the differences and distances between those two great composers, but I don't consider myself at all a composer in the Germanic tradition. And that's where I disagree with you. I don't see myself so much in the line of Bruckner and Mahler, but more in the line that started perhaps with Debussy and well, the non-Germanic. My roots would be more Debussy, Stravinsky, Bartok. They're very different, but still, that's a little bit more the line. That I would see myself into rather than the Germanic line.
yeah. Well, the symphony, the Astral Symphony, is huge. That's why I said Bruckner or
Yes.
Mahler. Not so much in
Oh,
the
I see.
in the harmonic language, but in the size.
Sure,
Like
sure, yes, yes, and big orchestra, and yeah, three astral poems. When you put
and
it's
long too.
the three astral poems. Excuse me, and what do you
Long.
say? Along the three astral poems, which can be performed separately, and then it's three pieces of about 11, 12 minutes each. But when you perform them together, which they have been performed together, it's about 35 minutes. I mean, still not Bruckner, but it's still, yeah, it's a long piece. And the Sinfonia de Profundis is also 35 moments. 35, sorry,
35
35
minutes.
minutes. Minutes, that's what I meant.
Uh,
Right. So,
well, a few months ago, you still have very good news. You retired in May 2025. I believe that in May
yeah,
2025, officially, you retired. Of course, a composer and a teacher and a scholar never retires, but you retired from the University of Cincinnati.
yes, that's
And
what.
yeah, so congratulations.
Thank you. That's
And
35 years of full-time college university teaching, of which 25 were at Cincinnati. So yeah, I've done my work. Yes, and it's
yes, 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 yes. So congratulations on this
thank
um,
you.
long and eminent career as a teacher. But now you don't have to show up at 9 in the morning. Uh, if you want, you can. You can teach a class. I'm sure you're invited, but you don't have to. You don't have to. So, and this could lead this conversation into maybe a kind of a conclusion. So, what are your projects? What are you doing?
Right. So here the issue was fine. I'll have plenty of time now, and I definitely want to keep doing things because for many reasons, I want to keep active, and I have too many ideas and things to realize. But so of my three areas: composition, scholarship, and pedagogy. What was I going to do? I cannot do all three of them. So what happened is that there was one project, one very major project that I had always had in my mind, but never had time or foolishness enough to get into it, which is a kind of a monumental, very ambitious, foolish book, which is Compositional Theory and Pedagogy in the Renaissance. We're talking of compositional theory and pedagogy in the 15th and 16th centuries. The reason why it's foolish and monumental is because we're talking of about 80 at least major good treatises in the 15th and 16th century that deal with aspects of compositional theory and pedagogy. And these 80 treatises are in about six languages, many of them, maybe half of them translated into modern English, the rest not translated into modern English. Some of them are just in facsimile of the original edition from early 16th century or whatever. So it's a huge challenge that, however, I've taken on, and I really I'm enjoying it very much. It keeps my mind very, very busy, sharp, and active, because really to be reading those treatises and figuring out those treatises in six languages is a lot of fun if you like to do that thing, and I do it. It's a book that it's needed. It's not there. And it's very much needed because, again, the Renaissance is one of the peaks of high points of music composition. And it's the craft of Renaissance composer is so absolutely incredible. We're still learning from it. We all teach, and I've taught all my career. I've taught 16th century counterpoint, which is the counterpoint of Palestrina and Thomas Luis de Victoria and all of that. We studied, we learned from it, and yet there isn't a book that really deals with what they knew, what they taught, and what they wrote about regarding composition. What was in their mind when they were composing. And I'm not going to guess, I'm not going to speculate in any way. In this book, what I'm doing is just looking at the sources, at the treatises that most of the time the same composers wrote, and see what they knew and see what they taught, and put it all in a book. So that project is going to take me easily 5-7 years if I complete it. So I'm busy with that. And then so I could find time to compose, I suppose, but then Routledge tells me that they want immediately a third edition with a revision of Understanding Post-tonal Music. So that's two books at a time. That really is as much as I can do, and I'm going to do it. And this third edition is an interesting challenge too, because the second edition came out in 2000. I finished it in about 2019, 2020, and then it came out 2021. Honestly, there had been zero demand in the market for minority composers at the time in textbooks. People were not. I mean, I have to admit it was a shame, but the fact is that most authors were not thinking much about it, but the public, the market was not asking for it either. So the second edition of Understanding Post-tonal Music, which has about 23 composers analyzed and studied, had four women. At least I had four women represented there, but zero minority composers. And of course, the third edition now coming out now cannot be like that. There's no way that I would want it to be like that, or that the market would accept it like that. So the big revision of this book includes is mostly including a number of major minority composers, and I've been enjoying that also, because I've identified 8 new pieces, composers for the book, that of course include also Hispanic composers, definitely. 3 important Hispanic composers are going to be represented there, and I'm talking of Ginastera, Alberto Ginastera, and Gabriela Lena Frank, a current present day American composer, American Peruvian composer, and Roque Cordero, a wonderful also American but originally Panamanian composer. So, and besides some black composers and Asian composers and a few more women and so. Anyway, these are the two projects that I'm working at, and believe me, I'm busy enough. Um, there's one more thing that happened in in recent years, which is, of course, after during COVID, after the pandemic, things changed a lot during and after the pandemic. And frankly, I mean, I'm going to be totally honest to you. Um, there is all of a sudden there was very little demand for music by older composers that were not famous. And notice that fame makes a difference. Of course, John Adams or Philip Glass are still they're famous enough. Although John Adams, curiously, has been his music is everywhere, but he has been complaining that since COVID, his music is performed much less. Even someone like John Adams says that. And then you have younger composers like now Jennifer Higdon or so many of them whose music, because they're younger and they're famous too, and their music is on demand. And I'm talking in all these cases are excellent composers, excellent music, no question about it, you know. But if you're a little bit older, and I'm not younger, and you're not famous, there has been much less demand for for music, especially orchestral music. A good friend of mine who passed away a few years ago, unfortunately, Jan Bach. Jan Bach was a very successful composer while he was alive. Not so not He never achieved the level of fame. Especially at the orchestral level, and yet his music was very highly performed because he wrote a lot for band and for chamber and for chorus and so on. So, very highly performed composer, Jan Bach. And he told me just a couple of years before he passed away, he said, you know, once you get old and you retire, it's amazing how much less demand there is for your music. And he said, what I'm totally beyond at this point, and I'm not going to do ever again, is beg performers for performances of my music. I'm not begging anyone. And I said, that's a very good point, John. Yes, very
Well,
interesting.
begging is a strong word, but
That's what
you
he said.
know that we all have to promote what we do one way or the other, and sometimes with a composer, especially for orchestral music, you have to pitch your music to committees and managers and
Right,
arts administrators, and it's not easy
right,
because it
of course.
takes
And
time.
yeah, yeah, and I'm still doing that, and pretty much I'm really trying to have. I have a substantial catalog. I have quite a lot of music. If they want to perform my music, there is a lot of music they can perform. And the thing is that what I don't like in our career is this idea that music is performed once and very often is never performed again, especially orchestral music. If you get a second performance, you're very, very, very lucky. And if you get more than two performances, it's absolutely incredible. But most pieces, believe me, most pieces by modern composers have been played once and never again, which
Well,
is a total shame. So when
yeah.
someone wants some of my music and they say, "Can you? Why don't you write something new for us?" Listen, just play the symphony or play one of the Astral poems. I have plenty of good music. Play them, and they have been played more than once, all of them, several times, and I've enjoyed that. So there is plenty of music if they want to play my music. But about your question about projects, it's also been a matter of destiny, so to speak. Just by chance and by serendipity, these two projects have kind of crossed my life at this point, which is the book on the Renaissance composition and the revision of understanding post-tonal music, and that's what I'm doing. These are the two projects
The
that
two main
occupy me.
things, yeah.
Very happy with them. Very.
When you were talking about performing your music, or actually any music more than once, I was thinking that your initial work, Cinco Piezas for Orchestra, um, that has been very successful. So that's wonderful, but could be a curse, like the same way Stravinsky's uh, Sacre du Printemps.
Right.
He, I think that he said a few times, "Oh, I've done other things. Why
Yeah.
are people not
Right.
playing my other stuff?" And
Yeah.
people still, to this day, they still want to play the Rite of the Spring, right?
Yes. Right. Right. Right.
So the
Yeah.
Cinco Piezas para Orquesta, that's a very popular piece, I think.
Yeah, well, I didn't say very popular, but yes, it's been performed a good half a dozen times in the United
Wow.
States and Spain, yeah, by a variety of orchestras, which, I mean, it doesn't make it very popular or a standard repertoire, but certainly is more successful than the average orchestral pieces that are composed nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, what I just mentioned, the standard repertoire, that's basically impossible, you know. Just the other day, I was commenting with a fellow composer. Just think, someone that Lutoslavsky, all right, someone like Lutoslavsky, who's a major composer of 20th century, major name. Can you name how many pieces he has that are a standard repertoire? Well, one, basically, which is the Concerto for Orchestra. And
Oh yeah.
if you push me, I could say the Concerto for Orchestra and the Concerto for Cello and Orchestra, perhaps. That's also play. That's all. You're not going to name other pieces that are a standard repertoire of a huge major 20th century composer. So imagine how hard it is for someone who's not Lutoslavsky, you know?
Yeah.
Luciano Berio, how many pieces has he put into the standard repertoire? You know,
Uh,
no comment.
Let me just go to something else and maybe we can conclude. But
Yes,
I'm very
yes.
curious personally about this. When you were in Madrid in the 1980s and then you wrote these Cinco Piezas para Orquesta, uh, what composers were you listening to? Or what composers were your idols? Or
Yes,
not
yeah,
idols like Beethoven, but more like
yes.
Maybe
I understand,
Lutosławski
yes.
or maybe John Adams. Were you aware of the postmodernism in the United States?
At the time, what you call postmodernism in the United States was mostly minimalism. And yes, we were aware of minimalism. That was the late 70s, early 80s, which was the beginning of minimalism. You know, in Spain, we were very, very aware of everything that was going on musically in Europe and in the United States. And yes, Philip Glass and Steve Reich were already well known enough with their own ensemble that we knew about them. Yes, but no, my master, teacher and mentor, Miguel Angel Coria, was a very French-oriented composer. So his music was, and actually his music was also postmodern in a way. I should have mentioned that, and that's one of the things I learned from him. But he was very much an exquisite orchestrator in the Ravel Debussy type of realm, and his music was very suggestive in that way. So yeah, Ravel and Debussy are two composers I looked at a lot at, especially for orchestration. Stravinsky was another one, definitely. Bartok was definitely another one that I was looking at, and I was at the time I was very very much into Ligeti, studying Ligeti and
Mm,
analyzing Ligeti, who was just we're talking of the 70s when I was studying with Miguel Angel Coria. It was the kind of the beginning of Ligeti being the major composer that he became after a while. He was already a major composer, but it was in his earliest stages. Um, and I studied him a lot, and that shows. I mean, there is a movement. It's very interesting. There's a movement in the Five Pieces for Orchestra that puts together the idea of Ravel's bolero, kind of ostinato melody with a very clear rhythm, puts it together with the sound mass idea, constantly moving and constantly changing sound mass and net structures, which is a technique that Ligeti used of Ligeti. So putting together the very clear rhythm and beat of the bolero, my it was my own
yeah,
melody, but the idea with something more Ligetian, that in itself is postmodern, because it was putting together two very different things, and the result I think is very effective. That the fourth movement of the Five Pieces for Orchestra.
yeah. Okay. Well, is I think there is a recording on YouTube of that
Yes,
music,
definitely.
right?
Yes, it's
Yes.
all on YouTube.
Yes.
Yes,
So I said I will listen to them again. I've listened to
yes,
them many times, but I will listen to them again. And I
yes,
suggest that if anyone watches us or listens to our conversation, also they do the same. So anyway, Ibiza is very well known for the Balearic, so-called Balearic beats and DJs and clubs and that kind of music. But we also know that Ibiza has the rondallas, which is the folk ensembles that you started with, and also a great composer like yourself in a different tradition. So Ibiza nowadays is many, many, many things. Not only the Balearic beats and the clubs and the debauchery, which is totally fine. Not that I have written about the club scene, so it's I think is a very interesting thing. But sometimes we tend, especially among English speaking people, to tend to think in one color. So Ibiza does not have one color. Uh, it has classical composers and folk music, and the eminent ethnographer and Alan Lomax visited Ibiza in the 1950s and recorded a great legacy of folk music from that island. Anyway,
yes.
so thank you so much, Miguel Angel. This has been a great conversation and I've learned a lot. And I really appreciate your time for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. It's been a pleasure to chat with you, and thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Goodbye, Tony.